Starting in chapter 3 of Acts today, we're continuing forward with this series for the next few weeks. And we're going to go several chapters at a time and kind of jump around thematically, but we're going today from chapter 3 through chapter 8 of Acts. And with the beginning of the book of Acts focusing on Jesus' last earthly instructions and subsequent ascendance into heaven, and then the event of the Pentecost, chapter 3 starts to get to what Acts is known for. We get to the actual stuff of what people think of when they think of the book of Acts, and that is the disciples start establishing the Christian church. Because when you think about it, if you haven't thought about it before, there's no church yet. There's some people following Jesus, and that in and of itself is God's church. But the thing is the structural formality, the body of believers, and the system in which that supports those believers as they decide to walk with Jesus together, it doesn't exist in the way that we understand it right now. And so what they do is they start to establish the church long before they get any fancy buildings, long before they're able to God forbid, create multiple denominations of themselves over things that they disagree with, before they do any write any formal liturgy of any sort of sense. I'm just listing the things that we understand of church these days. They establish the church in a little bit of a different way, and they are now, with the help of each other and the Holy Spirit, in where we're at in this book, starting to go and do the things that Jesus instructed them to do. And how they begin the church has a lot to do with how we might understand the church and Jesus' instructions for those of us who would follow him, being Jesus' disciple, being a Christian. And the specific things that Scripture highlights here have some things to teach us today. Now, a quick note about the past. There's a popular sentiment that we can fall into if we're not careful. It goes something like this. People say, man, I wish we could just go back to the way that it was in, with the original disciples. I wish that we got to just make the church as much like the disciples as we can. And we just got to make everything like that. And what that sometimes turns into is that, well, in order to do that, then we got to take all this other stuff away. We can't have worship centers. We can't have paid staff, right? They were just doing the right thing and being Jesus followers together. Those disciples knew exactly how things were supposed to go. And I say this not as someone who has a personal, professional, vested interest in being a staff member at a church, though I do. But I say this from more of a theological standpoint. Remember what disciples we're talking about. These are the disciples who very shortly ago all ran away when Jesus got arrested. These are the disciples that denied they even knew Jesus when he was arrested and beaten, right? Basically, during Jesus' time on earth, they got just about everything wrong that they possibly could. These are the disciples that we're talking about. Those people are the people that are tasked with starting the entire Christian church. And these guys were not magically transformed into perfect people when they received the Holy Spirit. Instead, they were given guidance and learned to follow the Spirit and deal with what was happening contextually in their day and age. They were certainly not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. God was leading them, God was with them, but was partnering with them in their imperfection, not magically just giving them the Mario star so they could do no wrong, right? Maybe the Mario star reference, make sure. Mario gets a star, he can't lose. Anyway, okay, fine, anyway. The point is that they're not perfect. The way that the church is now is the reason that it is the way that it is now. It's dealing with the reality that gets talked about in the business world that some of you are familiar with far more than I am. We're talking about scalability, right? There are fantastic God-breathed home church movements that do a lot of really great things. They say, we want to get back to Acts. I'm tired of the big church type stuff. Let's go do a home church. And that's great. During seminary, I worked with a church plant, and that's as a pastoral intern. And so I've done the small church thing as well. It's just important that I'm not coming from a super biased opinion here. And they're really fantastic things, but church plants and home churches run into a problem. They say, we're done with the big modern stuff. We want to get back to an Acts church where we're just helping lead each other, you know? And so they start small, and when it all of a sudden people are like, yeah, that's really great. And then it starts to grow and everybody looks at each other and people are people, meaning we're all imperfect, and personalities start getting in the way and people start looking around and they go, we really should have somebody that leads us. And all of a sudden, it just becomes a little bit more clear, hey, there's a reason why church organizations exist. Is because as things scale, especially in a 21st century where society and the makeup of the way that people gather, the sheer amount of people on the planet, we have 8 billion people in the world now. We're going to have a couple more billion in a few years, right? We're exponentially growing. The way that we grow and come together and need to be led from people who know and are gifted with certain abilities, all of these things inform how the church is today because we're dealing with modern problems. So we have a modern church. But we can still, so I just wanted to throw that back out there. Don't fall into the trap, right, of you know, knowing that today looks aesthetically different. Here at Hope, they would not, if we brought the disciples here, one, they would wonder how the lights work. But also, if we brought the disciples here, they'd be so floored by the way that everything looks, right? You get caught up in the aesthetic of it all. But my hope is that they would see that the heart of it is still the same. Don't fall in the trap of worshiping the method or the aesthetic instead of the God that walks with us in our modern world. We will continue to worship God and not tradition. You hear us say that at Hope a lot. And I'm saying this as somebody we're Lutherans. Like, Catholics love tradition, and we're 1A and 1B with loving tradition, right? But we don't worship tradition for tradition's sake. Did you know that if you do something for a really long time, it doesn't become more like holy than the things that you just started doing that are good? Like, tradition in and of itself does not instill value, but instead, we will continue to do what those traditions that we have, those practices that we've done a long time, if we still do them, it's because we believe that they're important. We worship God, not tradition. And so don't fall into the trap of, oh man, look at this church from Acts. What are we doing around here with all of our modern things? Get rid of the production. Just make Chris shout on stage. That's how they did it back then. That sounds like a joke, but there's a lot of Christians that fall into this, is where they worship the aesthetic of the original church. They worship the methodology because it feels detached, not just from our current day and age, but also our current problems and issues. And the farther we can kind of distract ourselves with some of those things, the farther away sometimes we get from the real message that I hope is still preserved in everything we do here in the modern church, which is following Jesus. Regardless of what it looks like, the heart is still there. Sound good? Okay. I just wanted to make sure that we understand the distinction. Now, we can learn from the timeless truths of God from Acts that we can apply within our lives in church context and learn about some of the ways that the Spirit was helping to form the church right there at the beginning, and that eventually has led naturally in the development of the church to the church expressions that we have today. That's not saying that, that was their original little church, and now we've evolved into this big church where we have it all figured out. No, I'm not saying we're better. I'm not saying they're better. I'm saying we are all imperfect people trying to follow Jesus. And when we follow Jesus, we become the church that God made for God's kingdom. And when, not if, but when we fall short, then we can come back to follow the model of Jesus that will always lead us in the right direction. So, I'm going to list a couple of different things in building the church and what those who followed Jesus did that we can learn from. One of these, those who followed Jesus, they lived together, right? Let me read out of Acts chapter 4, verse 32. Now the whole group of those who believed were of one heart and soul, and no one claimed private ownership of any possessions, but everything they owned was held in common. Chris you say, you sound like you're advocating for communism, right? It sounds like you're trying to tell me I can't have any stuff. I am not doing that. This verse is used in a lot of different ways, but what it's advocating for isn't a system or a certain model of resource allocation. It's talking about the posture towards the stuff in your life. Some deep sighs occur when I say that because I'm like, oh, okay, good, posture. For a second, I thought you were going to have to tell me I was going to give away all my stuff. Here's the thing, guys, let me ask you this question. How is your posture towards the things in your life these days? How is your attitude when it comes to other people having something that you feel like should be yours? How's that going for you? If it's anything like any of the rest of us, there are certain areas in life where we really struggle with that, right? And another question is, how are you with sharing? Do you feel like everything that you own is yours? And, to the other place, if somebody tells you that you should have to share what you have with somebody else, right? The question is, how are you with your stuff? How are you with sharing? One step deeper, a lot of people are really good at sharing with people that they like. Yes, it said the believers were with one heart and mind. They had shared goals and values, but you better believe that there were those, even within the disciples, that came from very different places. Jesus had disciples. These are the people that are leading all these people who have come from far-flung places in the world. The disciples themselves were zealots and tax collectors and Gentiles and blue-collar Jews. These groups could all just kill each other for being in each other's presence, simply for the hatred that was between their groups of people. I said they could kill each other. Many people that fit those descriptions did kill each other before Jesus came and after Jesus came. And yet, what they were able to do is put everything in proper perspective because of Jesus. So when somebody says the statement, well, I worked for this, well, why should I have to give it to someone else who didn't who I don't believe earned this, or who isn't owed it? Then what you're saying is the prime value is fairness, right? The core value, the most central building block of that statement is the belief that you deserve it and somebody else doesn't. And making sure that what people deserve is reflected in reality. And that makes complete sense, right? Because it just does. That's a logical and fair thing to say. But that's also not the God that we're following. It's perfect for Justitia, who is the Roman god of justice, who keeps all things in correct place and in correct order and makes sure that everything is fair and reflected in reality. Oh, that's what that Roman goddess did. But it's funny who the Romans killed our God on earth, and he rose again. And the problem is we're not worshiping Justitia. We are worshiping the God who came to the earth defenseless, demonstrated how we're supposed to live, and died as a sacrifice to defeat sin and death for us. If we're going to start talking about what's fair, none of us have a shot at being with God. None of us have a shot for the rich blessings that we have in our lives. None of us have a shot for deserving the love of God. And yet we have it. Deserving it never had anything to do with it. Fairness was never a part of it. That's not the God that we worship. Now, I'm not saying you need to ditch all your stuff and become a monk. I am saying that so many of us are unknowingly living with a dying spirit because we're so focused on what we're owed and what we have and what others have and whether or not that's fair. For each and every one of these, there's going to be, for these different points we can learn from, there's an invitation. There's an invitation to move past some of the ways in which we're broken and instead live into what the early church can teach us in Acts. And part of the invitation for this first one of living together is realizing that the person who has more than you, the person who has less than you, the keeping stock of those who have gathered more achievements, more possession, more wealth, more stuff, that has nothing to do with your inherent value. We can all intellectually agree with me. Yes, my worth is independent of the people who I wish I got the promotion over at work. Oh, yeah, I totally know that my worth is separate from the people around me. And then your neighbor gets a new Bronco. And you're like, oh, it's so sick. I'm saying it happens. I make light of it only to say it hits all of us at some point, where all of a sudden we're like, man, or you see somebody and you're like, man, they're a lot younger than me, and they just got promoted to XYZ position in my organization. Should I be should I be doing this? Should I be doing better? Should I be farther along? Oh man, so and so has so many different kids and we don't have. I mean, what? All of a sudden we just start to grade ourselves based on other people's lives, and the invitation is to be separate from that thing. It's the invitation is to move past an attitude of scarcity, which is the idea that motivates all of this. The belief that there is not enough, and the most important thing, therefore, because there's not enough of anything, there's finite resources, that means we have to get as much as we can or else we will not get it, right? What an attitude of scarcity leads to is that if someone has something, that's bad because you should have it, right? If you believe that there's only so much stuff to go around, we'll just call it stuff because it could be Broncos, it can be money, it can be, just good stuff in your life. And we start to get a little spooky about this. We're like, oh man, there's only so much like good living we can get. There's only so many good vibes around. So I'm just going to have as much as I can because there's only so much. And then all of a sudden you see somebody else who's achieving and you're like, they have it. That means I don't have it. That's the attitude of scarcity because it's believing there's only so much to go around. The invitation is to move past that into what Bob Goff calls the inverse economy of love. Because instead of simply running out due to the usage of love, you're like, oh man, there's only so much love. I better get some or else there's less for me, right? Bob Goff says the inverse economy of love is that it's generative. The more that you use love, the more that you love other people, the more that you have love for Jesus, the more that you love your neighbor, the more that you love the people who others don't love, the more that you love, the more love there is. It's the opposite of this like typical economy that we understand. It's separate from the attitude of scarcity. The more that you love, the more that you make, and the more there is in the world, and the world is better for it. It begets more and more that it's used. Now my question is, does that sound like the posture towards your things? It doesn't always for me. And I'm guessing it doesn't always for you either. And sometimes we all have an area or areas in our life where this can sneak up and bite us. So does that sound like that, your attitude towards your stuff, towards what others have? Or is this one of the things that maybe has led you to live less than the life that God has for you? Have you prioritized stuff instead of the other things that God might have for you and lead you as you become the man God made you to be? Because when you're not as worried about all the stuff, you're free to care about others. And that's what the disciples did. They shared the things they had. They raised up leaders. It talks about how instead of being worried about their own authority, in Acts chapter 6, they decided that they needed more people to lead. So they had people elect some more leaders. These disciples who were called to lead the Christian church were like, we probably need more leaders. And they came up with a way to do that. So they certainly lived together. And that has everything to do with their attitude and the posture of their heart. The attitude, the invitation is to move past that. Sorry, I had that. I got too excited. I didn't click. So the invitation is to move past the attitude of scarcity and into the inverse economy of love. Now, the other thing another thing that we can learn from them, people that loved and followed Jesus, they lived with God. So they lived with each other, but they also lived with God. Peter and John in this book, in this story, go before the council, and they're threatened to cut out all this trouble that they were stirring up, or else something bad would happen, right? Keep in mind, when they're told that you better shut up or else, they know what or else means. They just saw Jesus get beaten to within an inch of his life and hung on a cross. They know exactly what or else means. And they are told that they got to cut this out, and they send them on their way. So they don't go, well, they don't say, we got to get out of here. They also don't say, I just got to tough it out because God did this for me and I'm going to do it by my own strength. No, they live in concert with the Holy Spirit. They immediately go to God and partner with the Spirit that God has given them in order to figure out what to do next. That's an important distinction. So in chapter 4, verse 23, it says, after they were released, they went to their friends and reported what the chief priests and elders had said to them, the or else statement, right? They said, or else if we don't stop. And verse 23, when they heard it, they raised their voices together to God. They prayed when they didn't know what else to do. When they are faced with something scary, they went to God. And my question is that true for you too? When something really doesn't go your way or you're facing something really terrifying, do you live in prayer in concert with God, praying for the Spirit to help you? It's just a good question. It's just a check-in with yourself of where that looks like. And sometimes when we don't know what else to do, sometimes that's when we're like, God, help me. But what about the moments before that? When there's just a little bit of uncertainty, when there's just a little bit of discomfort, when there's just a little bit of conflict, do you go, God, is there something you have for me on this? I just pray for wisdom and pray for discernment, pray for your Spirit to be with me that I might be able to figure this out. Living in concert with what God has. I'm not saying you're going to become a magical puppet and immediately know what to do. I'm saying that if you want to talk about not hearing from God, my question is, have you taken any chance to listen? There are plenty of people who ask, Pastor, where is God in the midst of all my suffering? And then I ask them if they've prayed about it, and they're like, well, no. But where is God? God might be trying to talk to you right now, but have you taken the chance to listen? The invitation here is to recognize that Jesus didn't just die so that we could all live on our own by our own strength. God's so much better than that. We get to live. Jesus did die for us so that we can live, and now we can live with God as God walks alongside each and every one of us, no matter what we're going through. And our lives are certainly better when we walk with God. So they lived with each other, and they lived with God, and that invitation is to recognize and to walk with the Spirit that Jesus gave us so that we can continue to lean in to bringing God's kingdom here. Now, so those who built the church, they lived together, they lived with God. They also lived to serve others. They didn't just say, we knew it. The disciples were like, I always feel like they had to feel so good after Jesus came back. They're like, hey, remember when you said I was wrong about the guy from Nazareth? Boom, there he is. Remember? You guys were turds, and I knew that he was God, and you guys didn't, and here he is, and you're wrong, and I bet you're terrified now. Yeah, I'm one of God's disciples. Take that, right? Like, they don't say that like, how do you like them apples type of thing, right? There was no holy huddle of like, well, we believed it and you didn't. See you guys later. Actually, no, we won't because you're going to the bad place, right? Like, there could have been so much pride in these certain circumstances. The believers lived in such a way that after all of this happened, they lived to serve others. They healed people and continued to perform miracles, right? They baptized people. They preached the gospel story of Jesus. And no, that doesn't mean that if miracles haven't poured out of you, then you failed to live into what the church is. The invitation here is to live in a way that is centered around love for other people. These disciples weren't in like fabulous standing with society, with resources, they just followed a guy around for 3 years. You think they were getting income during that time? Right? Like you think that they were set up in the sense of the world at the time? No, they trusted that they were with Jesus, that they would be taken care of. But my point is that it's not like Jesus came back from the grave and was like, and also here's a black card. Right? Like here's incredible wealth. No, these guys just had to still trust that what God was doing in their lives was going to take care of them. And so how did they then live their lives? To bless other people. Well, we probably got to get a few things short up here first. We better, in a few years, maybe we can try to create a sustainable model so that we can get out there and say, no. They're like, let's go heal people now. Let's go to the people that God said that Jesus would have loved, those people that are out at the gates. It talks about the Ethiopian eunuch, somebody who has literally had a part of himself removed so that he could be used by the empire. Somebody who has lost so much in life and who was was often looked down upon in society because of certain things about him and either the choices that were made by him or most likely for him. And instead, those are the people that these disciples decide to live their lives for in a way that served others. Reaching out to those around you, you're like, yeah, that's true. Sharing the love of Jesus, sure, but you're like, well, I'd be more confident if I could do the miracles thing, right? You're like, I'd be so much more confident in being like, yep, I go to church, I believe in Jesus, and also your arm is unbroken. That'd be like that. I would feel, all of us would rightly feel very confident going into that situation if we knew indeed that was the outcome. But notice, the first step in showing up or in miracles is showing up to those in need and loving those that others don't love. If we're not even in the presence of people that need those things, how would we expect anything else to happen? My point is that it's very easy to get distracted when I talk about showing up and performing miracles. We all get stuck on the miracles part. My question is, how are we showing up? Are we around those people that need love? Are we around those who might not agree with you? If we are looking for a Jesus, if we are looking to follow a Jesus that shows up to heal people, let's take the first step in showing up. And that's the hard part, right? You're like, oh man, I don't really know. I mean, who knows? I mean, I'm sure he doesn't mean that person. Yeah, I do mean that person. Whatever that is in your life, there are plenty of circumstances in which we just get to show up. And in many ways, the miracles that happen, some of these stories in the Bible, you can tell that when the disciples show love and attention towards somebody that hasn't gotten it, that is as much a miracle as anything. And miracles, I think I've said this before, but in the current climate of the world, I'm not talking about weather, I'm talking about in the social, political, societal climate that we live in, it seems much more likely that I could float right now than all of us get along, right? It seems much more likely that one of us here at Men of Hope walks on water than it does that everyone could agree and be kind and love one another. Miracles sometimes are much more than just some sort of supernatural thing. It's the ability for us to show up and give attention to those who don't believe that they're worth it. Jesus believed that you were worth it, and so we believe that others are as well. If we're going to seek to follow Jesus, the first step is showing up. So let's go do that step. Living together, living with God, and living for others. Amen? Some questions from these different three areas. I tried to make this text bigger. So, how can we intentionally live in community with other believers? I know that I'm not tone deaf. I realize what time of day I'm here. I know who I'm talking to. You're like, Chris, we're in groups. That's great. My question is, do you know the people in your group? Do you have, or maybe it's even outside of your group, how is your family doing? Do you feel like you have genuine and honest friendships in the church, or is this something that you're still struggling with? How can you take a step? You're like, I'm doing great. Great. Well, what's the next step? In intentionally living in community with other believers. And then how can you involve God more in your daily life? Where is there a time that you can invite God into your daily walk? It makes sense that God is a part of your Wednesday morning at 6:15. Is God also a part of your Wednesday at 2 p.m.? Thursday at 4 after, Saturday night? When is God involved in those things? Where can you get God involved in that, realizing that God is not just there for times of crisis, but also wants to walk with you and is walking with you through all of it. But our awareness of God in those times will lead us into something new. And then, how can you show up for others? How can you make this an active part of what it means for you to follow Jesus? A lot of us believe that following Jesus means I say the right things, I believe the right things, I go to the right church service, I listen to worship music. Maybe I get real wild and put my hand up during one of the songs at church. Right? That's what being a Christian is. And then if I'm a nice guy, I love other people well. I treat other people well. That's just because I'm a nice guy. Just because I'm an extrovert. No. Just as much as anything else with your faith, showing up for people that need it is part of what it means to follow Jesus. You loving people well is just as much a part as showing up to church. Maybe even more so. I'm not trying to rank them, but my point is that just as much as any other stereotypical Christian things, you showing up for people that aren't loved, you showing up for people that need it, that's just as much of a spiritual practice as anything. My question is, do you see it that way? Does that make it a little bit easier? What does that look like in your life, in your circumstance? So there are some three things to think about as we learn from those who put the church together. I know that Richard went a little bit long and I went a little bit long. Next week, the teaching will be 4.5 minutes. And I'll give you back that time. Sound good? Grace and peace, friends. Go be good to each other, and we'll see you next week.